that is our agenda, the need for a party for people, planet, and peace. Boy, do we need it now. We need it more than ever, and I'm just so grateful to have been part of this group of incredibly visionary, thoughtful, caring, humane, connected people. So thank you so much for your foresight. A big thank you to all the party officers and the convention committee that made this event happen today on fairly short order and really just worked against all odds to bring together a really wonderful program. So here we are, coming out of the woodwork after COVID, and we are back, and you ain't seen nothing yet. So I'm going to just say a few words today about why the lesser evil is over and on with the greater good. Because as long as we've been around, we've heard about the lesser evil, and we've just watched people being extorted on their vote. And we've watched people be fear campaigned and smear campaigned about why they have to support the lesser evil. But it's really clear now in today's world that there is no lesser evil. I mean, for many of us, it's been clear all along, but now it's really important to point it out to people, because it's still, it's still being used against us at every possible opportunity. I see it all the time. I follow on Google what's being written about us, and all over the country, in fact, all over the world, we are, and Ralph Nader is, and I am still, those spoilers that gave away the election. This is like total bullshit. It always was, but right now, it's still being used that we are the spoilers, that our votes belong to the neoliberal billionaires and war machine behind the Democratic Party. And so I just want to point out now, so we can debunk that every time it comes up and really punch back, because we have a lot of work to do. The world is going down in flames right now, thanks to both parties. And power has been in the hands of the Democrats, certainly since, certainly at the time of Barack Obama and his election, and they had both houses of Congress. They even had, for a while, a 2/3 majority, if I'm not mistaken. So they could have done anything they want, but what did they do? They basically gave away the store to Wall Street, is what they decided to do. Remember how they were going to, Obama said this, Joe Biden said this, that their first priority was going to be to put into law Roe v. Wade and protect a woman's right to choose. Well, we've heard about that for decades. They don't do it when they have the opportunity to do it. And, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So just push back against that. And why did Barack Obama lose their commanding majority in Congress? Because they totally screwed people, because they were offshoring our jobs, they were bailing out the banks, they allowed, 7 million Americans, families, to be thrown out of their homes, one thing after another. So they have no one to blame except themselves for having lost their congressional majority, to having gotten to the point now where it's just 1 or 2 votes, and in fact, of course, they've lost their majority in the House of Representatives. And, look who they supported. They supported Joe Manchin against a very progressive challenger. They went to the mat. What's his name? Jessica Cisneros was the challenger of a very conservative Democrat in Texas. So it was the same thing. They could have had elected candidates that are supported by the people, and they did not. And what did they do to Bernie Sanders, who had a pretty progressive agenda on most things. You know, they basically organized to stop him. So, you know, it would be hard to organize a more powerful, funded, supported campaign than what Bernie Sanders was able to do. So if you weren't convinced before then, you should have been convinced by Bernie Sanders' 2 runs where basically the election was very clearly rigged against him. So it's, you know, it's really clear that Democrats had no one to blame but for themselves. And if you look at what's happened recently, the betrayals of People, Planet, and Peace are just jaw-dropping. Whether you are looking at, you know, whatever happened to the public option. Where did the public option go? It was, you know, it got left in the dust. What about the pharmaceutical deal so that we could afford our pharmaceuticals? Well, we've heard a lot of hype about how great the Inflation Reduction Act was because it was going to just change the playing field for pharmaceuticals. But they don't tell you the actual facts. How many people know what was in that bill for pharmaceuticals? This is the fine print. But basically, there will be 10 out of thousands of pharmaceuticals. There will be 10 when? 2025, I think, or 2026. That there will be cost breaks on 10 important drugs many years from now. And this is what, you know, this is what Joe Biden is going to be running on. This is what the Democratic machine is telling us why we have to get out and support Democrats. Or you can look at the, what was it called? At one point it was called the Jobs Bill. I forget the other names for it. But this was the great package that was going to have social infrastructure as well as physical infrastructure. This was the big combined bill. And because Democrats and Republicans wanted the physical infrastructure, they were going to tether the social infrastructure to that, like child care and elder care and family and parental leave that would be paid for 12 weeks, free community college, all kinds of good things were attached to this bill. But what did they do? They allowed the parliamentarian, someone who's not elected and has no power, they suddenly made the parliamentarian so powerful to say that, oh no, you couldn't link these together. Chuck Schumer used that as an excuse to divide the bill so that Democrats and Republicans could pass the infrastructure bill, which is what they passed, and then suddenly they didn't have the votes to pass the social infrastructure bill. So all these good things that they had run on suddenly became impossible. Then at the very 11th hour for Congress in their ability to pass meaningful legislation, at the very last moment, Joe Manchin and Chuck Schumer put out this bill, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. They put out this bill at the very last moment, and you know when that happens that there's foul play going on. Because why do they hold bills to the last minute? It's like the way they passed Romney Care here in Massachusetts. It was a 145-page bill, and they released it the night before. So it was like sight unseen by everyone. So same thing for the Inflation Reduction Act. They passed it at the last moment possible so that it really couldn't be scrutinized, because if you actually looked at it, it's mostly BS. This is the bill that pretends to be a climate and healthcare bill. What's the healthcare? Well, you know, it provided more subsidies for Obamacare, basically, to keep that going. Not exactly the kind of healthcare we need. And then it had this little package for pharmaceuticals, which were going to be many years off. So at the last minute, they passed this bill, and it also pretends to be a climate bill. Do you think of it, the Inflation Reduction Act? Yeah, so it's really a fossil fuels first bill, is what it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it requires, before you can use any public lands for a major project, like offshore wind, for example, before you can do that, or before you could set up solar on unused land or in the desert or something, you know, which is where solar should be. It should not be in our forests. It should not be in open space. It should be along the highways and in our rooftops. They don't enable that. You know, they just enable it to degrade public lands. So this bill says before you can do any major projects for green energy, you first have to, get this, you first have to use 60 million acres of public land each year, 60 million of offshore public waters for fossil fuel projects, for drilling. And then you have to use 2 million acres of public lands for similar drilling before you can use even 1 acre of publicly owned property for a major renewable energy project. Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. It is suicidal. It really is ecocidal. It is suicidal, and these absolutely clueless leaders in the Democratic Party are patting themselves on the back and talking about what a great thing this is. This is not a great thing. This is terrible. Let me mention also what the Democrats did to working people. What did they do to working people? They basically trashed the right of working people to collective bargaining. They did that. They forced the railroad workers to accept a contract that they had already rejected. They forced the railroad workers to accept a contract that they had already voted down. Why? Because it was completely inadequate. And what's happening to the railroad workers is happening to all workers across the state, across the nation, I must say, and in many areas across the, what's that?
And the environment in Ohio, that
Oh, absolutely.
How did they force them to sign that contract?
That is a very good point, because that contract not only abuses workers, because it puts workers' safety at risk, it really it creates incredible risk for exactly that kind of accident to happen. That accident was the product of abuse on many fronts, not only abuse of the workers, but long-term abuse of their safety. And that was on the part of both Democrats and Republicans that refused to upgrade the braking system of those trains. And that was not only the fault of Republicans, that was also the fault of Democrats. And under Obama, they refused to basically restore those protections when they could have. So this was absolutely inexcusable. And we've gone on to see that working people want unions. People want unions, but our unionization is what? It's down to like 11%, I think, if you include everything that is public service unions as well as the private sector. That those numbers keep dropping, even though everyone wants unions. There's enormous support, even in the Republican Party. I mean, it's all over the American electorate now, that people realize none of us are safe unless all of us are safe, and that especially applies to working people. And the last reason why the lesser evil is over is nuclear weapons and war. And it's really impossible to talk about nuclear weapons without also talking about war, because we are in an economy of war, we are in a climate of war, we are in a mindset of war where the military-industrial complex is basically calling the shots. And our elected leaders, with the exception of mostly a handful of Republicans who are doing this for their own reasons that I don't particularly really trust or find convincing. You know, they don't want a war with Russia, but yeah, bring it on with China. You know, well, I'm sorry, but that's not going to fix it either. Both of these wars are basically being concocted. These are engineered wars, and yes, the war in Ukraine is horrible. It is illegal, it is criminal, as all wars are. But if you look at the bigger picture, this war has been provoked for decades. And the consequences of moving missiles, nuclear-capable missiles, which are now all along Russia's border, western border, it was absolutely known what this was going to lead to. And it's no coincidence that the US began dismantling nuclear treaties that enabled them to put nuclear missiles anywhere they want, which is what they are in the process of doing right now. And this is going on around China as we are moving our nuclear submarines, to surround China, establishing new bases in the Philippines, which the people rightly are rejecting and are really protesting against. So, we, and I don't mean we in this room, let me say the US empire is really driving these wars with not quite complete because of a handful of Republicans, but otherwise it's enormous support, and particularly from the Democrats, where even the so-called progressive Democrats could not manage to muster a letter saying, why not consider diplomacy? And they had to retract that letter. So this just makes a mockery of the suggestion that the Democratic Party is on our side. They are not on our side. They are on the side of the lobbyists and the corporations, the military-industrial complex, the censorship-industrial complex, the environmental destruction industrial complex. That's where we're going under this bipartisan leadership. And it's really, I think it's just morally incumbent on us to keep going. And I'm so grateful to this party that has had the foresight for decades about where this system was going. For me, the wake-up call was when the Democrats, on a voice vote, overturned clean elections in Massachusetts. We had campaign finance reform that we brought to this state with overwhelming support in the late 1990s. And it took about 2 years for the legislature, which is overwhelming, it's like 80% Democrats, it was back then too, took them just a few years to repeal it. And that to me was like the wake-up call, that if the Democrats in this state, who are supposed to be progressive, are rejecting and destroying the work of tens of thousands of people, the hard work to pass that bill as a voter referendum because the legislature would not pass it, then they do not deserve our support, and they are not going in the right direction. And what's happened since the 90s? Money and power have only become more and more concentrated into the hands of a few. We are an oligarchy, we are not a democracy, we are a plutocracy, and working people and the environment and global peace and security, and I must say security in this country where we have become a militarized state as well, none of that is going to do well. We are now, we are in a position now where we are struggling to survive when we should be a country in which we all thrive. That is where we should be. We have the resources to do it. We have the insight to do it. It's been known for a long time. It was very well documented. What was it, like 10 years ago? A study out of Northwestern and Princeton, the Gillens and Page study, that showed that public policy is driven by money, period, and has practically zero connection to what people want. I'm gonna just say one more thing, and then I'll wrap up. And that is, if you look at the firepower now in one nuclear submarine, anybody have an idea what that amounts to?
No, because we're not part of the military industrial.
Right.
That's right, and they don't want you to know. Exactly, they don't. And the press is completely in bed with the military-industrial complex, so they don't want you to know either. But one nuclear submarine basically contains 8,000 times the entire firepower of the Second World War, the entire destructive capacity. And to put it in other terms, it contains 4,000 Hiroshimas, the equivalent of 4,000 Hiroshima bombs. And that's just one nuclear submarine. We have like another 16 or 17, something like that. So it's really important for everyone to know that we are all in the target hairs of this oligarchy. It's not something that happens over there because it doesn't take very many nuclear bombs today at the size of today's nuclear bombs. Those Hiroshima bombs, those are considered tactical nuclear weapons. You know, those tactical nukes that they talk about so casually and so cavalierly. We don't have to worry about tactical nukes, right? We don't have to worry about Hiroshimas? I don't think so, but what they're talking about now, today's bombs are anywhere from 20 to 50 times the power of Hiroshima, and the targeting works in such a way that a city doesn't just have one nuke targeted at it, it has more like 20 to 50 nukes targeted at it. So you can have basically the explosive power of 1,000 Hiroshimas that could come at any of us. And we have absolutely clueless moral criminals who are running this show, who are playing a game of nuclear chicken, and who are risking all of our lives. We need to throw those bums out, all of them. So, the last thing I want to say is that not only is there an incredible imperative, a survival imperative for us to keep up the fight, we have to keep up the fight, but we have an incredible opportunity to keep up the fight. There is a real vacuum now in political leadership and political credibility, and the American people now are really chomping at the bit. And if you look at polls, which they also don't want you to know about, and they don't do them very often, but the numbers of people now who have rejected the two parties is almost 50%. It's actually 49%, whereas the numbers of people who identify as Democrats is 25%. The numbers who identify Republican is about 24%. So the battle is halfway won. People, we don't have to convince people that they're being completely screwed, that working people are being crushed, that our environment and future is being destroyed, and that our lives are all in the target hairs. I didn't mention the words nuclear winter, but that's the flip side of these really powerful bombs. It doesn't matter where they go off. At today's firepower rates, you only have to really hit one city to generate sufficient debris going up into the upper atmosphere that basically destroys crops, and it would be, I believe it's around 2 billion people who would starve to death, that our agricultural capacity would be brought down, not quite 50%, but almost. So, I mean, this is a death sentence for humanity. We're not gonna survive that. In the same way, we're not gonna survive it when the Greenland ice sheet or the West Antarctic ice sheet collapses. And we don't know when that will be. The science is not capable of predicting that. But we do know that some major backstops against ice sheets breaking up and falling into the ocean, that those are going. And they're going at an accelerating rate. So, you know, people, planet, and peace are all in the target hairs right now. People are not happy campers, and they are clamoring for alternative political parties. and they have been so abused and abandoned and betrayed, especially working people who really have the power to change our direction now like never before. And I think the more we can organize our capacity for a general strike and support workers who are striking wherever they are, whether it's at Starbucks or at FedEx or at our hospitals and nurses or teachers. It's really important for us to be as involved as we possibly can with labor, and I'm really glad to see that on our agenda today we have several representatives of unions and labor and campaigns that I think we need to become as involved with as we possibly can, because it's when we get together across the boundaries of our movements for people, planet, and peace, that's when we really use the power that we have. And remember the words of Frederick Douglass, first of all, who said that power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. We need to bring that demand into the political marketplace, into the political discourse. We need third parties. We need the politics of people, not the politics of profit, which is mostly what we have out there. We badly need that, and in the words of Alice Walker, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. So it's really important that we use that power. Remember these polls, because they tell us the electorate is really ready. And the more we can do this from the bottom up, the better. Having done the national thing for 2 campaigns, it's very hard to support your gains, even when you have as good a campaign as possible. It's hard to keep it going if you haven't built that kind of human infrastructure at the local level. So that's really, I think, where our focus needs to be. And big kudos and big thank you to our various local electeds here and the people who have run for office. Just raise your hand, please, so we can give you a big thank you for leading the way. And that's where we're